I'm joined today by author and entrepreneur Andrew Yang, who's running as a Democrat for president in 2020 on a platform of universal basic income, Medicare for all, and human-centered capitalism, all issues I've talked quite a bit about. Andrew, thanks for talking to me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with UBI. I mean, I guess there's so many ways we could enter that conversation, but maybe one way would be, what specific problem do you believe UBI solves?
Well, the most pressing issue that people who are looking at the economy are focused on is the automation of labor, where we've automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin between 2000 and 2015. And I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley. We're about to do the same thing to workers in retail, transportation and truck driving, call centers, fast food, and on throughout the economy. But the great thing about universal basic income is not just that it's necessary because we're going through this transition, but also that it's going to improve the day-to-day lives of tens of millions of American individuals, families, and households, where people will be able to pay their bills, start saving some money, save for their children's education, potentially move and even start a new business. So there are a lot of upsides to universal basic income. But the thing that certainly galvanized my attention to it is the fact that our economy is changing for good because of advancing technology.
So under your plan, you're talking about $1,000 a month per person, $12,000 for the year. Would that replace other social welfare benefits, or would it be in addition to?
It would largely be in addition to it because if you look at our social programs right now, they're not really doing the job. But we will get some money from existing social programs because if someone's already receiving significant benefits, it's not necessarily the case that the $1,000 a month would be layered on top. So, for example, if someone was receiving $700 in food stamps and housing assistance, they would get trued up to $1,000 if they decided to opt for the freedom dividend, but it's not like they'd be getting an additional $1,000. So that will help bring the costs of the universal basic income down significantly because so many people are currently receiving benefits.
I want to talk about some of the possible reasons why UBI may not work as well as some think that it would. And to be clear, my audience knows I've been talking about UBI for years and years. I've done a ton of interviews about it. I've also looked into, other possibilities like a negative income tax, different types of tax
Yes.
credit situations. One of my concerns with UBI is that it wouldn't change the underlying sort of vulture capitalist problems that exist. It wouldn't really move us towards a different type of economy. It's just, hey, everybody gets 12K or adjusted, of course, depending on the particular circumstances. And one of
Yes.
the maybe negative consequences would be that we see a $19,000 full-time job, or we should, as completely outrageous. But if you're getting 12K from the government, that might allow the corporation that's paying $19,000 for a full-time job to be subject to less criticism because, hey, it's really 31 with that other 12K.
Yeah, so there are a couple of points in there, David, and I know you're one of the first people who figured out that universal basic income could be an incredible way to advance our society over time. So if you think about it, we're experiencing these epic gains from new technologies with Amazon and Google and these other companies harvesting incredible profits really for themselves. And so universal basic income is a great way to distribute that bounty throughout society. And while you're right that there are dynamics of this winner-take-all economy that universal basic income won't address, it seems to me like that universal basic income would make it so that everyone can share in the dividends of progress quite directly. And so if you imagine how it could work out in an ideal world, people are able to build a more human-centered economy in their communities. And then as technology improves, people are getting more and more of those gains. And this is the first big step in that direction. In terms of corporations and people possibly having to take less money, I think that you should look at it from the ground up, which is that people would no longer be forced to take an abusive or exploitative job because at this point they can just go home and live off of the $1,000 a month if worst comes to worst. But also that people would be able to determine for themselves what kind of work that they want to do. And as a serial entrepreneur, I know that more and more people would do things that they care about in their community. They'd end up doing work that would help move themselves and their families and our society forward uh, more so than if they're forced to take a job just to survive.
I guess that's where I'm less sure because I guess I'm unsure whether $1,000 a month in a lot of parts of this country is really the difference between having to take the $19,000 or $22,000 full-time job or not. In other words, we can't give everybody 50,000, right? The numbers just don't work. But at the same time, I'm just not sure that the 12,000 actually provides people that freedom, at least not in a lot of parts of this country.
Well, you're based in Boston, I believe. Like I'm based in New York, and there are certainly parts of the country where $1,000 goes very, very far. I mean, it's the equivalent of getting paid $6 an hour full time, which is not that far off from what many people are surviving on. And I've spent years in Ohio and Alabama and Michigan, and I was stunned at how reasonable the housing could be on like something that's not that different from $1,000 a month. But the other thing is what you're proposing really is that everyone's working for like a handful of corporations that will then try and grind costs down, which is true. That is what many large corporations would be driven to do. But you have to think about the way an economy would look in a town, let's say, of 50,000 people, where all of a sudden there's another $60 million in discretionary income. I mean, you'd be looking at many businesses on Main Street and artisanal type businesses that would become much more viable and strengthened if everyone had more purchasing power. And so it's not that everyone would be doing some job for some giant conglomerate. We'd actually see this incredible proliferation of small businesses and Main Street businesses around the country. And those are the jobs that people would end up filling.
Well, that gets me into my other concern directly, and I'm kind of glad you brought it up, which is that I think that a lot of big CEO entrepreneurial types have said, I want UBI. We've heard it from Mark Zuckerberg. We've heard it from, I think, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, long list of
Not Jeff yet, but
not
Elon,
Jeff
yes,
Bezos yet.
Mark,
Fair
yes.
enough. My concern is that even though on paper you might have a community, like you said, you might say, hey, this, Worcester, Massachusetts, there's now an additional $40 million of money available, which is going to go back into the local businesses. A lot of that money, I believe, is going to go back into app purchases and Netflix and Amazon Prime subscriptions and games. And I think that while there is definitely some altruism among some of the billionaires that are saying they like this idea, a lot of them know that a lot of that extra money is going to go to them and not to their local communities. And I wonder if that's a concern to you.
Well, if you think about it, if you think about your own spending, if I gave you $1,000 a month, it'd be actually quite difficult to spend all of that on new apps and media and Netflix consumption. So a lot of it would go towards car repairs, taking your kid out to a movie, like a little bit of savings for someone's college education. I mean, a lot of the money would flow towards things that make the world go round in real life. And the thing, like, it's unfortunate that people look at the motivations of folks who are advocating for universal basic income as a way to somehow question the merits of the idea, because we are talking about plowing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of purchasing power into the hands of the American people that are struggling every day to make ends meet. I mean, the underemployment of recent college graduates is up to 44%, with school loans at a record 1.4 trillion. I mean, that's crippling our younger generation. I know you're familiar with this. 59% of Americans right now can't pay an unexpected $500 bill. So think about the difference that universal basic income would make in people's day-to-day lives. The folks in technology, I mean, you could say like, oh, they're just trying to make their own businesses more socially acceptable, which may totally be the case. But they're also closest to the scene of the automation of jobs. They see their own incentives, they see their own organizations, and they're trying to send up a red flag saying, look, guys, what we've done in the past will not work moving forward, and we need to think much, much bigger. And
Yeah,
that's where
I think that there's
too.
two sides to that, though. There's two sides. I think you're right. If Mark Zuckerberg wants UBI, that is not an attack on the merits of UBI. That being said, it's true that if you see a particular group of people advocating for it, it's important to think about the ways in which they might benefit that are not completely obvious to us in evaluating the totality of the idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, and the thing that you're pointing out is something I could not agree more with, is that more people need to get excited about universal basic income and the difference it would make in their communities. Women should look at it and say, hey, this would be a way to recognize and compensate women for all of the uncompensated work that's done in our households and communities every day. Women would benefit more because women unfortunately get paid less and have lower levels of savings. So women should say universal basic income is great for women. People of color should look at this and say, hey, we have less access to opportunities and less wealth. One study showed that African American households in America would have a median net worth of 0 by 2050. So people of color should be saying, hey, universal basic income is great for us. We need to take the baton from the tech CEOs and bring it to every other community and say, this is great for humanity, this is great for our society, and let's make it happen. And that's why I'm running for president.
Other angle I want to approach this from and get your feedback to. There is a proposal being developed by economists at London University called Universal Basic Services. What they argue is that if you focus on specific services rather than just cash, that you're going to more directly meet the needs for people that have the lowest income. And they argue that you deliver more value for the same expenditure if you, for example, deliver healthcare to someone that doesn't have it versus cash in the same amount of the services they might otherwise be purchasing. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that a flat UBI is better than a service-based approach?
Sure, there are at least 3 reasons. So the first is that we've been trying to administer, in some ways, a services-based approach over the years, and it just hasn't worked. Where, like you have vouchers for housing, vouchers for food, vouchers for education in some cases. And we've seen that our programs aren't actually elevating people out of their situations. In many cases, they have perverse incentives attached to them where if they start to flourish, then you don't get it anymore. So one is got to look at what's working. 2 is you have to look at what our government is actually capable of. Where, so for example, some politicians might say we need to educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future, ignoring the fact that independent studies show that efficacy levels of government-sponsored retraining to be close to 0%. So if you plow more money into, for example, education programs that may not work, as opposed to giving people purchasing power, that, in my mind, is us talking ourselves into the government being able to do things that it's not going to be able to do. And the third thing is that there is a real access and administration issue where if you have services, inevitably there ends up being some kind of mechanical and elaborate process to access those services. And many people end up struggling with that and getting excluded. And there end up being people that don't get what they're supposed to get under whatever program we devise, whereas straight cash is going to deliver on purchasing power where it's most needed, and people will be able to attend to their needs most directly.
From a legal perspective, Andrew Yang becomes president. Is it executive order? Is it a bill that is developed by Congress? How do you make this a legal reality?
Well, the great thing is that all you need is a majority of Congress. And if I'm president, there will likely have been a blue wave, and so we'll be looking at a Democratic-led Congress. And if the guy who's running on universal basic income becomes president, we all know what's going to happen next, which is that Congress is going to get together and we're going to start rolling it out. So what most people don't realize is that this passed the House of Representatives in 1971 under Richard Nixon, and it stalled in the Senate because of a Democratic senators that wanted a higher income threshold. So there is not any massive legal step one needs to take. It's really just an act of Congress. And something exactly analogous has been in effect in Alaska for 36 years, and it's wildly popular in a Republican state. So this is much more feasible and achievable than most people believe.
We've been speaking with Andrew Yang. He's an author and entrepreneur running as a Democrat for president in 2020. The platform is based on universal basic income, Medicare for all, and human-centered capitalism. Andrew, really great to talk to you. Have been following your work for some time, and it's so great to be able to talk to you about it.
Well, David, it was great being here, and please let's make this a regular occurrence. I'm a big fan of yours and your work.
Thank you. Let's do it.